Thank you for your hard work today as well. This channel is a reading channel for sleeping. I will read with all my heart so that you can have a moment before going to bed. This story is by Ryunosuke Akutagawa. It is a work based on the story of Rashomon, which took place in Kyoto during the Heian period, based on the story of Kumjaku Monogatari. This time, I will deliver it with the sound of the rain, in line with the situation of the story. The sound of the rain is said to have a relaxing effect and a peaceful effect. It is said that it is more comfortable. It is said that it is more comfortable. I hope you can have a moment before going to bed. I would be happy if you could ask me your impressions in the comments section. On this channel, I am reading stories that can make you sleep. Please subscribe to the channel before you faint. Then, slowly. Good night. Rashomon. Ryunosuke Akutagawa. It is about a day's dark. One entertainer was waiting in the darkness under the Rashomon. Under the wide gate, there was another man. There was no one but this man. There was only one Kirigirisu in the large round gate, which had been painted in many places. As long as Rashomon is in Suzaku Oji, there are probably 2 or 3 more Ikamegasa and Mamiboshi who are in the darkness other than this man. As long as Rashomon is in Suzaku Oji, there are probably 2 or 3 more Ikamegasa and Mamiboshi who are in the darkness other than this man. No one is left other than this man. For 2 or 3 years, there have been disasters such as earthquakes, windstorms, fire, and famine in Kyoto. There have been disasters such as earthquakes, windstorms, fire, and famine in Kyoto. There have been disasters such as earthquakes, windstorms, fire, and famine in Kyoto. There are many things that are difficult to overcome. It is not a one-way street. According to the old record, it was said that the wood that crushed the Buddha statue and the Buddha statue, and the wood that had the 2 of them, and the wood that had the gold and silver leaves, were piled up on the roadside and sold in the castle of Takigi. Since the paradise is the end of it, there was no one who would throw away the repair of the Lashu gate from the beginning. Then, by doing the good thing of that mess, the stubbornness and the thief lived. Finally, in the end, I was able to have the habit of bringing a dead man who had no way to withdraw to this gate and throwing him away. Then, when I couldn't see the sun, everyone was angry with me, and I decided not to step into the neighborhood of this gate. Instead, a lot of crows came from somewhere again. When I looked at it in the daytime, the crow drew a circle without a word, and it flew around while crying around the high dead man. When the sky above the gate turned red in the sunset, it looked clear as if it had rolled a piece of sesame. Crows, of course, come to hunt the dead man's flesh on the gate. However, I couldn't see a single crow, because it was late at night today. However, it was about to collapse. And so, on the crumbling, long, grass-grown stone steps, I could see the crows. Feces clinging to the ground, white and pointy. And in all this unfinished work, it doesn't know what has happened to the crows. It was the first one that has been someone else's possession. It's like the crows have to catch the crows in a net. The crows in this world have no influence on juggles. No matter how many crows they are taking in at night, some are the ones they want to kill. However, even if it stopped raining, he had no idea what to do. Usually, of course, he should go back to his master's house. However, his master gave him time 4 or 5 days ago. As I wrote before, the city of Kyoto at that time had no water supply. Now, this servant was given time by his master, who had been used for many years. In fact, this water supply is nothing more than a small yuani. Therefore, the servant said that he was waiting for the sunset. It is more appropriate to say that the servant, who was thrown into the rain, had nowhere to go and was in the distance. Moreover, the sky today also influenced the sentimentality of this servant from Heian-cho at least a little. The rain that started to fall from the low of the monkey, there is still no view to go up. Therefore, the servant tried to do something about tomorrow's life no matter what he did. In other words, he tried to do something that would not work. While following the unbridled thought, I have been listening to the sound of the rain falling on Prince Suzaku since a while ago. The rain enveloped the Rashomon, and collected a sound from afar. The sunset lowered the sky gradually, and if you look up, you can see the sharp white cloud out there, which is a little bit heavy in terms of carriage. It is not difficult to choose a way to do something that does not work. If you choose, you will just be buried under the trail or on the roadside. If you do not choose, you will just be brought to this gate and abandoned like a dog. If you do not choose, you will just be buried under the trail or on the roadside. The sinner's mind finally arrived at this place, as if he had taken the same path many times. However, this path was ultimately a path. Although the sinner affirmed that he did not choose a way, in order to form this path, it is natural that there is no other way but to become a thief after that. He actively affirmed that. However, he did not ask such a question. Now he blew through the gap between the pillars of the gate with indifference. Kurajirasu, who had stopped at the pillar of Ninuri, had already gone somewhere. While shrugging his neck, he looked up at the gate around the tower with his blue shoulders, which were piled up in the wind of the mountain. If there is a place where you can sleep comfortably at night without the sorrow of the rain or the fear of being caught in the eyes of people, you can sleep there at night anyway. It is because he wanted to sleep there. Then, fortunately, he saw a ladder with a wide width that went up to the corridor above the gate. Even if there were people on the top, they were all dead people anyway. The cause was that the Hijirizuka, who had lowered their hips, stepped on the ladder at the bottom of the ladder. While being careful not to get hurt, he stepped on the ladder at the bottom of the ladder with his feet wearing a straw hat. It was a few minutes later. At the middle of the wide ladder that went up to the corridor above the gate of the Lashu gate, a man was crouched down like a cat and was looking up while breathing. The light of the fire from above the corridor slightly wet the right side of the man. In his short beard was a man with a red body with a pimple. From the beginning, the man said that the people on this ladder were all dead people. When he climbed up the ladder a few steps, he saw someone flying a fire on the ladder, and it seems that the fire was moving it. This is because the yellow light was reflected while shaking on the back of the ceiling, which was covered with clouds in every corner, so it was immediately known. It is not just because the fire is lit on this Lashu gate on this rainy night. It is because the fire is lit on this Lashu gate on this rainy night. The man stole the sound of his feet like a firefly, and finally climbed up the steep ladder to the top of the ladder. So, while making his body as flat as possible, he put his neck forward as much as possible, and looked inside the cage with fear. When he looked inside the cage, he saw that as he heard the rumor, there were a few dead bodies scattered around, but the range of the light from the fire was narrower than he thought, so he did not know how many of them there were. But what he learned while stumbling was that there were dead bodies naked, and there were dead bodies wearing kimonos. Of course, it seems that there are both women and men inside. So, the dead bodies are so suspicious that even the fact that they are all people who used to live is like a doll made of clay, that they open their mouths and stretch their hands like a doll made of clay, and roll on the floor. Moreover, in the part where the shoulders and chest are higher, the shadow of the part that is lower by receiving the dim light of the fire is even darker, and it has been silent for a long time. This is the problem. But at this moment, a true soul enters into the hell which is love. Pandemonium, and even if this is false world, this is an illusory rupee.gia. It was because he had taken away his sense of taste almost like anything else. At that time, Janan's eyes saw for the first time a human lying in the field. It was an old woman, like a monkey with a light-colored kimono and a thin white head. The old woman held a firelit pine branch in her right hand and gazed into the face of one of the corpses. When she looked at the long part of her hair, she probably thought it was a woman's corpse. Janan had a fear of the sixth part and a curiosity of the fourth part. The old woman was moved by her curiosity, and at that time she even forgot to breathe. She thought that if she borrowed the fifth part of a 9-piece night, her head would grow fat. Then the old woman stabbed the end of the pine branch between the floor and put her hands on the neck of the corpse she had been gazing at until now. At that moment, the old woman caught a glimpse of the offering and sun. But Janan seemed to actively look at her hair for the next 10 seconds, but as soon as she took her hand, her hair trended a little and started to show her longer hair implementation. As for the first part which had grown a tiny hair, it became too small, as if it had vanished. When I lift it, the hair supposed to go back and forth. From the heart of the sinner, the fear disappeared little by little. And at the same time, the fierce wrath of this old woman began to move little by little. No, there may be a misunderstanding when it comes to this old woman. Rather, The rebellion against all evils has increased in strength in part. At this time, someone brought up the question of whether to be a thief or a thief, which this man had been thinking about under the gate of this old woman. Probably the old woman said, "I chose Eugenie without any remorse." The heart that hates this man so much was like a pine tree cut into the floor of an old woman, and it was burning up vigorously. The sinner, of course, did not know why the old woman pulled out the hair of the servant. Therefore, in principle, she did not know whether to clean it up for any of the evils. However, for the sinner, it was already an unforgivable evil to pull out the hair of the servant on the gate of this old woman on this rainy night. Of course, the sinner had long forgotten that he was going to be a thief until a while ago. Therefore, the sinner powered his feet and suddenly jumped up the ladder. Then while moving his hands over the miradopes, he walked similar to the old woman. Not long after that the old woman was so surprised. Her looks, however, op ortrad chodoshi tr agiabuda ima and verbal knee level centrois. So she gave a quick standing, plastering herself with a watch and ran as she went a while later takes a good rest. As the age of 26 on the moon and the age emerged, it seemed that the old woman had become more complex. But, what is it? Entering this horrible state like this overnight? That the old woman's woman was in need of such something more, was this creation. He thought, for the Perniluk legislator, he said. When the old woman looked at the servant, she jumped up as if she had been hit by a stone. "Where are you going?" The servant was startled by the old woman's stumbling on the street and hurriedly tried to run away. The old woman still tried to get through the servant. The servant pushed her back again as if she didn't want to live with it. The two grabbed each other in silence for a while in the crowd. However, they knew the result from the beginning. The servant finally understood. The servant grabbed the old woman's arm and forcibly twisted it to the ground. It was just like a chicken's leg, with bones and skin all over it. What was she doing? No, this is what she said. The servant pushed the old woman away. Suddenly, she took off the staff of the servant and pointed the white iron color in front of her. But the old woman was silent. She shook her hands and caught her breath with her shoulders. She looked at her eyes as if they were about to come out of her eyelids. What was that, then? That is, she suddenly instantly absorbed into Asaka. The servant parted her lips in surprise. Haran told her husband that the old woman was boiling. The servant slipped and fell into a bureau. The middle-aged woman was earning some money. She brought her husband back to her room. "Your Majesty." And the heart of the elephant that had been waiting for a long time had been awakened before he knew it. The only thing left after that was just to do a certain job, and there was only the peace of mind and satisfaction when it was completed. Then the servant softened his voice a little and said this. "I am not the chief of the Kibi Ishi. I am a traveler who has just passed under this gate. So I don't have anything to do with you. However, now what I was doing on this gate, I just have to tell me about it." Then the old woman opened her eyes even more and watched her servant's face. I saw it with sharp eyes like a flesh-colored butterfly with red eyelids. Then she moved her lips, which were almost one with a nose with wrinkles, as if they were chewing on something. I could see the shorn-nosed Buddha moving with his thin throat. At that time, the voice of a crow crying from its throat came to the ear of the servant. The voice of a crow crying from its throat came to the ear of the servant. The voice of a crow crying from its throat came to the ear of the servant. When calling of God, I opened my hand. I changed my body, and she threw here a little bit half of sushi. When calling of God, I changed my body, and she threw here a little bit half of sushi. Not without a difference and diagonal personage. What I see are those who are not listening to Dujia Kajima. I was just reading what I was reading but was column nonster, he came into my heart with a strange difference. Then the scenery must have passed to the front. The old woman had a long hair taken from the head of the dead man with one hand, and she said this while stumbling with a voice like a whistle. "I see, It may be a bad thing to pull out the dead man's hair. But the dead men here are all human beings who don't care about that. Now, the women I just pulled out my hair from are snakes, and I'm going to sell them to the people in Tatewaki to say that it's Hoshio that I cut and dried them with my own hands. If I hadn't died in the dark, I would still be selling them now. That's also because this woman's selling Hoshio tastes good, and she said that she had bought him a lot. I don't think this woman did anything bad. I don't think so. You shouldn't think Uazini is right. And then again, you shouldn't think that I was doing anything wrong. I don't think it at all. That was all my fault. I am sorry. I'm sorry I told you. I really can't believe her. Really? After all, if you can't do it, you can't help 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 it. You can't help it, 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 you can't help it. A certain courage was born in the heart of the beggar. It was the courage that was lacking in this man under the gate just now. It was the courage that was trying to move in the opposite direction from the courage when he got hold of this old woman just now. The beggar wasn't just wondering if he was going to be a beggar or a thief. At that time, this man's heart was also full of courage. He was driven out of his consciousness so much that he couldn't even think about being a beggar. I'm sure it's true. When the old woman's story was over, the beggar cried out in a moaning voice. And so, he hurriedly left. Suddenly, he took his right hand away from his pimples and said this as if he were biting the old woman's hair. Then, I don't blame you for trying to be a beggar. If I hadn't done that, I would have been a beggar. The beggar quickly took off the old woman's kimono. Then, he put the old woman, who was trying to cling to her feet, on the ground with his bare hands. Up to the edge of his mouth, he could only count 5 times. The beggar carried the yellow kimono he had taken off on his side. And so, he hurriedly ran down the ladder to the bottom of the night. The old woman, who had been lying down for a while as if she had died, woke up naked from the dead. It was soon after that. The old woman whispered, and she was still burning with the light of the fire, and she ran up to the edge of the ladder. And so, from there, she turned her short white hair upside down and looked under the gate. Outside, there was just a dark, dark night. There was nothing but darkness. No one knew where the beggar had gone. The end. And so, from there, he hurriedly ran down the ladder to the bottom of the night. Outside, there is just a dark night. No one knows the whereabouts of the perpetrator. The end.